Hi and welcome to another episode of MTV Monster TV. Thanks for joining me, Chief Monsta. Today we are going to cover a lot of the challenges that renovators have when they are painting over existing walls. Either an old house they have, a flip it project, or just a new paint job they want to give to their existing house. So this comes up often, these questions, and one of them that we see frequently, particularly with those that have bought or have older homes and they're about to paint over them, is that wanting to understand how they know whether the walls that they're going to go over are either oil-based solvent paints or acrylic paints. And that obviously is going to challenge on what your preparation is to paint over it. So there's a real couple simple ways on how you do that. What I've got is a couple samples of one of our surfaces with a solvent-based enamel and one with just an acrylic, basically acrylic internal interior paint. So quite simply, there's a few things you can do to test that. You can either use methylated spirits, or really before I was just doing my nails and got the nail remover, you might have a bit of this at home. You can use a nail removal, or you can use alcohol wipes. And quite simply, you want to make sure that before you handle those materials that you do protect your hands. And unlike, you might have seen previous episodes where I had the rubber latex gloves, these are a little bit more durable, so very similar to those of you that have done dishwashing without a dishwasher would be familiar with these ones. So basically, on an enamel paint, if I wipe over it with a solvent, where's my wipe? So we get the nail polish out, childproof lids. I just get a bit on the surface there like so, and if I wipe over a solvent paint, I get a couple of random spots. I should find there's no residue that comes out. And if I do that with things like these wipes, there we go. And these do have a strong alcohol, ethanol odour to them, but I'll wipe over that and I've got really no residue, nothing's coming off. So if I did that on an existing wall, I'd go over a couple of random spots. I'd be able to say, well, that's an enamel paint, and I know then what I'd have to prepare with. If it's an acrylic paint, I should find that these types of wipes, there's a couple of random wipes here, and I'm starting to see a residue come off on the wipe. I'm not sure if you can see that, but there is a bit of a paint residue there, and if you hold that up at the light, you can probably see there's a spot that's missing. But you'll note that it does smear, and you'll see that the coat of paint, here's our colour cards moving, has come away with it. So that is a real simple test. Now, important with these wipes, don't use hand cleaning wipes because they have got a soap residue in there, and you'll leave a soapy residue on the wall, and then when you go to paint, it'll actually impact the adhesion of the paint. The good thing about alcohol or methylated spirits or ethanol wipes is that it'll evaporate. So once you wipe over it, it's clean and off you go. Now, once you've worked out whether it's an acrylic or enamel paint wall, you then basically have to work through whether you can put, and this is the question that comes out, can we use our Monster paints over an enamel, over a solvent-based enamel? The answer is yes, you can. So once we've established that's an enamel paint, we would basically just use our prep seal, give it a good brush over or roller with our prep seal, which is a primer sealer undercoat. That prepares a surface, and then I go ahead and just paint as normal. If it's an acrylic paint, you shouldn't have to put a solvent enamel over the top. However, if you've established that you've got a surface, maybe like a door, and you're going to be using a solvent enamel, and there's an acrylic paint over that, it's not a standard product we have, but give us a call or check out with our Monster crew. We do have a special primer that you can put over that, which will allow us solvent enamel. However, we try and stay away from solvent enamel paints over the acrylics wherever possible. And don't forget that before you do start to paint, particularly those older surfaces, you may need to give a good sugar soap wash onto that surface first. Do that. We do have sugar soap in our range, otherwise get some of it at your local hardware store, give it a good clean over, and then tackle the paint job as required. Now, the next one is about aged wall surfaces and what needs to be removed. Yes, look, old paints often will need to be removed, especially if you think they're starting to flake or a little bit dodgy. However, before you go to all the trouble of sanding paint or getting a heat gun to remove it, establish what the surface is below it. You might find you've gone all this trouble and find that you've actually got the render and plaster in a really poor condition, and you're going to go all that trouble of sanding paint, dust masks and everything over the furniture you may need, and find that you need actually a render or a plastering repair job. So there are a few ways you can check that out. You can do some random tap tests to see if there's any render that sounds drummy. Otherwise, get a building expert in that might be able to help you with that if you do doubt it, because that needs to be fixed before you start painting. Real important. This next piece is about lead paints. So you've got an old dwelling, you're about to paint again, and you may need to sand or remove that paint. Really important thing that a lot of people overlook, and this is for both internal and exterior paints, is that likely is if you've got a house that was painted before 1970, lead paint was used quite exclusively, and there's a good chance your house has got lead paint. Now, lead is serious. You do not want to be sanding or grinding lead off of a surface, lead paint off a surface, and have the dust particles either in a room or outside. Pretty dangerous stuff if you look it up, what it can do to you. Breathe it in around children, yourself, pets. Even if it's outside and you think it's going to be safe, and it ends up in your clothesline and clothes, etc., with the dust particles moving around. So my suggestion is you invest in one of these. And not that I want to throw 3M, this is not a sponsored surface here, but these are fairly cost-effective lead check swabs that you can get from a hardware or paint store. And it's some quick, I think this costs us, what, 25, 30 bucks. You put these in, check out whether the surface has got lead on it, and at least you know then what you're going to do, how you might approach it. Now, you might say, well, the house was painted after 1970. In Australia, paints prior to the 70s, almost 50% of it, 50% of the paint was lead, and we'll go into that, and that's pretty serious. But after 1970 to 1997, the regulations require that paints could have up to 1% of lead. Now, that is still very, very high compared to what is in the US. In the US, they changed their laws in 1978. They went to 0.006% was the maximum you could have in a paint, and in 2009, the US changed that to 0.0009%, so almost a zero, which is obviously safer. Now, Monsta paints have no lead in them, but it is important that before you start, particularly if you've got an older place, check that out. And if you do have a repair to be done or removal of that paint, know what it is you're removing and know the conditions, because lead is very, very serious. So that's a serious point. We don't want anyone getting sick or injured over a paint job they might be doing at home, which is meant to be a great fun time investment hobby, whatever you flipper, whatever you're doing, and then you end up with finding that you've got lead poisoning later on, or you've impacted someone around you, or a dead pet, which is even worse. So ensure you've checked that out first. So your next question might be, okay, we've got the lead tester, we've done what you've suggested we do, Chief Monsta, and we found out that we do have lead paint. What do we do there? There are a number of suggestions on how you can remove lead paint. You can use all sorts of dust extraction materials, certain masks, safety glasses, etc. I'm going to give you the advice I'd give to my kids if they were going to remove lead paint. I wouldn't go to those extents. You can follow, there's a number of YouTube videos, and there's a lot of paint companies that have got advice on how to sand it down and remove it safely. Do the smart thing. Again, this is not a sponsored paid event, but there's a couple of products that we're familiar with. One is called Peel Away, which is a great product that is on the market that you can remove lead paint with on various surfaces. There's another one from Newtech, a Melbourne-based company called EcoSafe Paint. It's a remover, removing lead paint safely. The professional painters use it. It's just a really good investment to look at those sorts of products, because, like I said earlier, if you check out what lead can do to you, it's dangerous and nasty shit. So let's get it right. All right, once lead paint's removed, it's just fairly standard. That wall gets cleaned down, wiped, ensure it's dry. Monsta Prep Seal, either use our exterior paint or our interior paint if it's inside, and off you go, job done, and lead paint will be forgotten and you've got a new renovated wall ready to go. So that brings us to the end of this episode. However, with all this talk of lead paint, you're probably asking, why was lead ever used in paint? This is our Did You Know fact for today. So I've got some cheat notes here. The Romans. Let's thank the Romans for many things, and the Romans found that lead was such an inexpensive filler. They use it in many things, like makeup and additives in food. Could you imagine that in makeup? Like your face would just be like this, wouldn't it? Like a bit heavy. Anyway, not that I've had that problem, but it was used in those sorts of products. And then what was found with lead in paint was that it gave you a few things. It was the ability to help paint dry faster. It gave paint the ability to have greater moisture resistance, and it just gave it a greater durability once it's on the surface. Thankfully, with technology and chemistry, there's a lot of great alternatives now on the market that you can use to get those effects without using lead, which is how Monsta paints are made. We have zero lead in our range, and I have to say a lot of our contemporaries and other brands out there do have zero lead in their paints as well, which is great to see. So you probably find now with painting it's a lot safer than what it was many years ago, but there's an interesting fact for you. So please remember to subscribe if you find the MTV shows of interest. That button is below. Press the subscription button and you'll always be alert to our upcoming episodes. Thanks for joining us once again. We'll see you next week. Ciao.